You're standing at a fork in the road. One path is paved with cold marble, lined with columns, and leads to a courtroom where every belief you hold will be cross-examined. The other path is soft dirt, winding through bamboo groves, and it leads nowhere in particular. Because the walking itself is the point. 2,000 years of human thought split right here. And the strange part? You've been told to pick a side. But what if the real mistake is choosing? Right now, millions of people are quietly blending these two paths without even realizing it. Around 420,000 people search for Buddhist meditation every single month. 300,000 search for Stoicism quotes. On Goodreads, the Tao Te Ching has more reviews than Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Something is happening. People are hungry for logic and for peace of mind, and they're reaching across civilizations to find both. By the end of this, you'll understand why these traditions develop such different tools, where they secretly agree, and how fusing them gives you something neither can offer alone. Let's start with a timeline most people get wrong. The common assumption is that philosophy began in Athens. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the usual lineup. And those thinkers were extraordinary, no question. But here's what nobody tells you. By the time Plato was writing his earliest dialogues around 380 BCE, Eastern texts had already been wrestling with the deepest questions of existence for over 800 years. The Rig Veda, one of humanity's oldest collections of philosophical hymns, was being compiled around 1200 BCE. The Upanishads followed around 800 BCE. These weren't primitive religious chants. They contained systematic inquiries into the nature of consciousness, reality, and the self. Meanwhile, Confucius was teaching in China between 475 and 221 BCE, overlapping almost exactly with Aristotle's lifetime. So the story isn't that Greece invented deep thinking and everyone else followed. The story is that humans on opposite ends of a continent, with no internet, no shared language, no cultural exchange, simultaneously felt the same burning need to ask, what is real, what is right, and who am I? Now here's where the paths diverge. Not in the questions, in the answers they prioritized. Western philosophy built institutions around formal logic. If you scan the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, roughly 75% of entries on Western thinkers list logic in their headings. Logic became the backbone of Western intellectual life. Curricula, courtrooms, scientific method, all structured around deductive reasoning and systematic argument. Eastern traditions took a different bet. When researchers analyzed major Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist texts using digital corpus methods, they found that about 65% of passages contained direct practice instructions. Not arguments about what truth is, but guidance on how to meditate, how to perform rituals correctly, how to cultivate virtue through daily action. Western thought asked, what can we prove? Eastern thought asked, or how should we live? Neither question is wrong, but they build radically different civilizations. The obvious counterpoint here is that Eastern philosophy must lack rigor, that it's all incense and poetry. And this is genuinely one of the most persistent misconceptions in intellectual history, because logic wasn't born only in Greece. Around 400 BCE, roughly half a century before Aristotle wrote his Organon, Chinese Mohist scholars were already systematizing conditional reasoning. Bamboo slips excavated from Yinquishan and carbon dated to between 350 and 300 BCE preserve Mohist logic frameworks. These texts lay out as if-then reasoning structures that parallel Aristotle's syllogisms in function, even though the two traditions had zero contact. So logic had twin births, one on papyrus, one on bamboo. Both sprouted branching trees of deduction independently. The reason most people only know about Aristotle is survival bias. Greek manuscripts were copied, translated into Arabic, then Latin, then spread across Europe. Mohist texts were marginalized during the Han Dynasty and nearly forgotten. The lesson here isn't just historical trivia. It's a warning about how easily we mistake what survived for what existed. But the deepest divergence between East and West isn't about logic. It's about something far more personal. It's about you. Or more precisely, whether or not you even exist. Western philosophy anchored its entire project on a stable self. Plato used the Greek word as auto sar, roughly meaning the essential self, 58 times in the Republic alone. Descartes later crystallized this with or son I think, therefore I am. The self was the foundation stone. If you couldn't trust that you existed as a coherent, continuous being, you couldn't trust anything. Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism, made the opposite move. The doctrine of anatta, no self, appears repeatedly across key suttas of the Pali Canon. It doesn't claim you're nothing. It claims that what you call nuni is a shifting bundle of sensations, thoughts, and habits with no permanent core. And here's the twist that most people miss. Both approaches aim at the same destination. The Western self is meant to ground you so you can pursue truth without illusion. The Eastern no-self is meant to free you from the illusion of permanence so you stop clinging to things that inevitably change. One tradition says build a strong foundation. The other says realize the ground was always moving. But both want you liberated from confusion. The Hindu tradition adds yet another layer. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad uses the word is Atman about 116 times, describing an individual soul that is ultimately identical with Brahman, the universal consciousness. So even within Eastern thought, there's a fierce internal debate. Hinduism says there is a self, and it's everything. Buddhism says there is no self, and that's freedom. These aren't minor footnotes. They represent centuries of rigorous philosophical argument happening entirely outside the Western tradition. Now, if East and West diverge so sharply on the self, you might expect their ethics to be completely incompatible. But something remarkable happens when you compare Aristotle's golden mean with Buddhism's middle way. Aristotle argued that every virtue sits between two extremes. Courage is the midpoint between recklessness and cowardice. Generosity sits between wastefulness and stinginess. The virtuous person navigates this middle ground through practical wisdom. The Buddha, without any contact with Aristotle, arrived at a strikingly similar structure. The Eightfold Path steers practitioners between indulgence and severe asceticism, prescribing right view, right intention, right action, all calibrated to avoid extremes. So across thousands of miles and completely independent intellectual traditions, two of history's most influential thinkers converged on the same geometric insight. Wisdom lives in the center. The extremes are where suffering breeds. This isn't coincidence. It suggests something deep about human psychology. That balance isn't a cultural preference. It's a structural feature of how minds navigate the world. But here's the catch. Even though the golden mean and the middle way look similar on paper, your brain processes them through fundamentally different channels. And we now have the neuroscience to prove it. When researchers put people through formal logical reasoning tasks, the kind of thinking Aristotle championed, brain scans show a 30% increase in activation of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. That's your executive control center, the region responsible for planning, rule following, and abstract analysis. Now, when different subjects practiced focused attention meditation, the kind of training rooted in Buddhist tradition, a completely different pattern emerged. Insula and dorsomedial prefrontal cortex activation increased by about 25%. These areas handle emotional regulation, body awareness, and attention monitoring. A meta-analysis found less than 30% overlap between these two activation maps. Reasoning and meditation aren't just philosophically different. They are neurologically distinct modes of operation. Your brain literally switches networks depending on which tradition's approach you're using. So when someone tells you that meditation and critical thinking are basically the same thing because both require focus, the data says otherwise. They feel similar. They are not. This has a profound implication for modern life. If analysis and contemplation activate separate neural circuits, then strengthening only one leaves the other underdeveloped. A person trained exclusively in Western-style logic may excel at dissecting arguments but struggle with emotional regulation. Someone devoted purely to meditation might achieve remarkable inner peace but falter when forced to make a complex, evidence-based decision under pressure. The data on stress relief hints at this imbalance already. 25% of American adults report using Eastern practices for stress relief. Only 10% cite Stoicism or Aristotelian ethics for the same purpose. People intuitively reach for contemplative practices when they're overwhelmed. But that doesn't mean they should abandon analytical frameworks. It means both tools belong in the same kit. Some might argue that framing all of this as East versus West is a gross oversimplification, and that objection is legitimate. Western philosophy alone encompasses analytic, continental, medieval scholastic, and existentialist schools, among many others. Eastern traditions include Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, Confucian, Jain, and countless indigenous philosophical lineages. Within each side, there are thinkers who would fiercely disagree with each other. Neoplatonists borrowed heavily from Eastern mysticism. Silk Road traders carried philosophical ideas alongside spices and silk. The binary itself is a lens, not a law. But here's why the lens is still useful. When you're standing at that fork in the road, overwhelmed by data, pulled between the demand to think harder and the longing to live better, you need a map that simplifies enough to be actionable. The East-West framework isn't the final word. It's the first word. A starting point that reveals complementary priorities you can then explore in all their rich complexity. And that's what makes this moment in history so interesting. Online culture is already doing the blending. Stoicism hashtags on Instagram feature debate imagery 82% of the time. Zen art hashtags show meditative landscapes 91% of the time. The algorithms are sorting us into categories, but actual human behavior is messier and more creative. People read Marcus Aurelius in the morning and practice mindfulness at night. They journal using Stoic prompts and sit in silent meditation on weekends. They are building bridges between the marble cliffs and the bamboo groves without waiting for permission from any academic department. So here's the framework. When you face a decision that requires clarity, when the question is ars what is truer, or on which option is logically sound, lean into the Western toolkit. Formal reasoning, evidence evaluation, structured argument. Activate that prefrontal cortex. But when the challenge is emotional turbulence, when the question is, how do I sit with uncertainty? Or Nanda, how do I stop reacting to everything? Reach for the Eastern toolkit. Meditation, breath work, acceptance of impermanence. Light up that insula. The point isn't to pick one tradition. It's to know which tool fits which problem. A hammer is useless for cutting wood. A saw is useless for driving nails. Both are essential. If this reframed how you think about philosophy, not as a dusty academic subject, but as a living set of complementary tools, there's a lot more on this channel at this level of depth. Drop a comment and tell me, which side of the river do you naturally stand on? The logic side or the practice side? I genuinely want to know. 2 paths, 2,000 years, 1 fork in the road? You don't have to choose. You just have to start walking both.